They called it testimony, but it felt like a second enlistment. Same posture, same orders, just quieter. The courtroom smelled like paper and winter coats, as if all truth had to pass through dust first. I sat beneath the emblem, the headphones pressing my ears into the past. Every translation a small delay where a lie could breathe. I told myself I was protecting my brothers, the boys who once slept with boots on, the ones who still wake to phantom artillery. I told myself the dead do not need my words, only flowers. Pride can sound like a prayer when you don't listen too closely. Outside, pigeons circled the rebuilt bridge, as if counting its stones, as if checking whether the river still remembered who fell into it and who crossed. My city had learned to look forward while squinting backward. So had I. I thought truth was a door without a handle on my side, something I could lean against until history got tired. Then the boy walked in. Not a boy, not really. A man with a father's absence in his face. He sat in the back, and I felt the handle turn. I run a tram depot now. Mornings smell of grease and old rain, metal dust folding into my clothes like a secret. Sarajevo starts with brakes squealing and pigeons lifting in a tired gray wave. I sign the sheet, count the spares, pretend the city's heartbeat is just electricity finding its way through cables. Machines are honest. If a wheel is bent, it sings about it. If a wire is cut, it doesn't try to sell you a memory in exchange for forgiveness. The men call me capo, even though there's no rank here. It's a joke that isn't a joke. Once you give orders long enough, your voice learns the shape of command. Sometimes I hear it when I'm alone, as if the depot has become a quiet platoon and the trams are armored, patient animals waiting for my signal. I don't give signals anymore. I watch. I fix. I say, pass me the wrench, and the word pass feels safer than the word fire ever did. Coffee breaks are our diplomacy. We pour into small cups and bow to the steam. There's a rhythm to it, a truce at 11. Across the table, Amir tells stories about his twins, how they've decided the tunnel under the house is haunted by good spirits who bring chocolates. I nod. In the corner, a radio coughs out Sevda, and the singer drags her voice across an old love like a broken comb. We keep our eyes down, listening without admitting we are listening, drafting peace with our spoons. On the wall near the door hangs a crooked calendar. The tribunal date is circled in red, then crossed, then circled again by a different pen. The depot is full of these small contradictions. 2 bolts from 2 different manufacturers holding the same door. 2 religions mapped onto the same exhausted neighborhood. 2 truths sharing one man's mouth. The papers came in spring. I read my name and felt the floor tilt, as if the city's hills had leaned closer to hear me. I told my supervisor I'd be gone for a week, maybe 2. He said, "Do what you must, brother," then hugged me with that slow Bosnian hug that pretends to be clumsy so it can be forgiven for being tender. At home, my mother folded a sweater into my bag as if I were going to a wedding. She kissed my forehead and said, "Speak well, not speak true, not speak clean. Speak well." I don't know if she chose the word carefully or if the word chose her. Some days, language is a doorway. Some days, it's a mirror you can't bear to see yourself in. The summons said I would appear as a witness, not as a defendant. That is a kind of mercy with a price tag. I ironed a shirt until the steam burned my fingers, called a taxi, watched my building shrink in the rear view. The driver kept glancing at me like he recognized the uniform I had put away years ago. He didn't say anything. In this city, we have learned to compliment silence. In the courtroom, the microphones were black roses. Everyone had one. Everyone watered theirs with breath. An interpreter's voice filled one ear. My own voice filled the other. I thought of the nights in the mountains, when the radio would crackle and we'd pass it from hand to hand like a cigarette, each of us inhaling a portion of the world. Now the world was inhaling me. I sat. I swore. My right hand felt heavier than my left.
"Tell us about that day," the lawyer said, a polished kindness slipping over something sharp. "What day? We have so many." But they only wanted one day, the one that glows brighter in the drawer, the one everyone pretends is just a misplaced photograph. I began like a mechanic, clear, procedural, precise. At 0600 we moved. At 0740 we were at the ridge. At 0815 we received instruction that all non-combatants were to be escorted out. The verbs were neat, obedient. I gave them like spare parts. I did not mention the smell of burnt wheat drifting from a field we had not ordered to burn. I did not mention the man who lifted his hands and kept lifting them even after the bullets had finished their arithmetic. I did not mention my friend's laugh when he said, "The town has no men left, only ghosts rehearsing their wives' names." I told them we protected who we could. We did. I did not tell them how few that was. I told them we found no orders for executions. That is also true, because some orders arrive wordless, wearing only an example. I told them our commander insisted on restraint. He did, on that day, and I did not tell them what restraint looked like when it slipped after dark. The court likes sentences that end cleanly, but memory, mine, comes in fragments, long strings of smoke, thin threads of shame snagged on fences. I filed the edges down. I made a narrative you could set on a table without staining the wood. The interpreter kept up, her voice gracious, as if singing my better self into the record. When they asked about names, I offered initials. When they asked about a particular house, I said I did not recall. I remembered perfectly the kitchen with a blue enamel pot, the child hiding behind it like a moon behind a hill. My mouth closed around those images like a door closing on an animal you can't afford to feed. During recess, I stepped outside into a sunlight that felt interrogational. Reporters smoked in clusters. A woman with a notebook smiled, careful not to look like she was smiling. The air had the dry sweetness of old paper. The courthouse stairs were crowded with people who had traveled farther than I had, following the rumor that history might finally speak their language. That was when I saw him, the man with the father's absence in his face. He was older than the last photograph I had seen of the family, because time is not a map that unfolds evenly for everyone. He had a scar where a boy's astonishment might have been. He stood with his hands behind his back, the way men do when they're holding themselves together. We looked at each other for 3 seconds. In that time I heard boots on wet leaves, a door kicked with the gentleness of a threat, a kettle whistling in a burned kitchen, my commander's voice telling me to keep the line, keep the line, keep the line. Pride rose in me like a sick heat. Pride and its quieter cousin, fear. I nodded to him as if we were neighbors. Inside, I returned to the microphone and continued to arrange the furniture of that day so it would not fall on anyone. I told myself I was protecting my brothers. I told myself I was protecting the living from the dead
and the dead from being embarrassed by our modern astonishment at their dying. The judge thanked me for my clarity. That word again, clear, as if clean, as if truth were a window one could wipe until Sarajevo disappeared from the other side. When my session ended, the interpreter removed my headphones with the tenderness of a nurse. Her hand smelled faintly of citrus soap. She said softly, "Thank you for speaking." I could not tell if she meant thank you for telling us, or thank you for trying not to tell us everything. Both can be kindnesses, depending on who you want to sleep at night. I signed a paper. I closed a door. The handle turned again behind me, though I had not touched it. I went back to the depot the next morning. I checked the wheel alignments, then the overhead lines. I poured coffee. The men argued about a striker who had missed an open goal the night before, forgiving the ball where they would not forgive the man. The calendar hung like a tilted question. I straightened it, then let it tilt again. Some truths sit better at an angle. At lunch, I took my tray outside. A tram rattled past with school children pressed to the windows, their mouths round with laughter. For a moment, I believed the city was healed, and my testimony was a stitch holding the new skin in place. Then, from the depot gate, a shadow crossed the concrete, and a voice asked my name. I didn't have to look up. I already knew the face. I didn't answer the boy that day. Or the man, rather. His voice had grown older than his skin, rough at the edges the way gravel becomes smooth from too much rain. He only said my name, just that. But the way he said it made me remember how names used to sound before we buried them under ranks and silence. He didn't accuse me. He didn't threaten me. He only asked, "Can we talk?" I said, "Not here." The next day he came to the depot. He stood outside the fence as trams passed, each one clanging like a verdict. I watched him from the office window, pretending to read maintenance logs. His jacket was thin, too thin for March, and I wondered if his father used to scold him for that. Then I wondered why I cared. After work, I walked out to meet him. He didn't flinch. He just handed me a photograph, weathered and small. His father, smiling in front of a white house, one hand on his son's shoulder. I had seen that house. I had stepped inside it with my boots on. "Do you remember?" he asked. "Yes," I said, though it wasn't a confession, just a noise that resembled truth. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said quietly, "They said you testified." I nodded. "Did you tell them everything?" The streetlight flickered, as if the city couldn't decide whether it wanted us visible. "I told them enough," I said. He smiled, a small, crooked smile that carried more pity than anger. "Enough for who?" That question followed me home. It slept beside me. It woke up before dawn. I started going to the tribunal archives, telling myself it was just to follow the process. In truth, I wanted to see what the world had made of us. The clerks wore suits that didn't fit, and the air smelled like toner and old cardboard. Every testimony was neatly typed, every lie preserved like a fossil under glass. When I found my own transcript, I read it twice. The words looked honest enough, verbs aligned, nouns obedient, but I couldn't recognize the man who had spoken them. He was clean, precise, almost virtuous. My mouth, I thought, had done a better job at washing blood than any river ever could. That night I didn't go home. I took the tram to the edge of the city, where the war's shadows still lived. Half-rebuilt buildings, stray dogs, bullet holes filled with plaster that never quite matched the color of the wall. I bought a bottle of rakia from a man who didn't ask questions. The first sip burned like punishment. The second felt like prayer. I hadn't drunk in years. During the war, alcohol meant weakness. After the war, it meant memory. I had avoided both, but that night I wanted to stop remembering cleanly. By the third glass, the world softened. The river murmured under the bridge, that same river that once carried bodies and promises. I told it, "You can forget me too, can't you?" The river didn't answer. The boy, his name was Armin, kept coming back. Sometimes he waited near the depot. Sometimes he followed me to the cafe near the station, where old veterans gathered like weathered coins in a box. He never raised his voice. He never begged. He just asked small questions, the kind that slipped under armor. Was my father afraid? Did he say anything? Was it quick? I wanted to tell him kindness, but kindness is also a form of deceit. I said, he was brave. It was true. Bravery often comes last, when nothing else is left to lose. Armin took a job at a repair shop nearby. He said it helped him stay close to what was left. I didn't ask what that meant. We started to meet after work, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for silence. He asked me once why I lied. To protect them, I said. Who are they? My men. My commander. He nodded. And who protects the truth? I didn't answer. A month later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside were photographs, not of the war, but of now. Men from my old unit, drinking together, laughing at some bar near the new city center. They looked normal, whole, free. On the back of one photo, someone had written, "We live because you lied well." It wasn't signed. I stared at it for hours. At first, pride bloomed, proof that my silence had meant something, that I had done my duty. Then came the nausea. They were alive, yes, but what kind of life was it? Built on the same silence that had buried Armin's father. The next day, I skipped work. I walked to the outskirts, to the field where our unit had once camped before the assault. The grass had grown back, wild and tall, erasing every footprint. But I still knew where the bodies were. I sat down. The wind smelled of soil and rain. Somewhere, a cowbell rang. The sound made me think of mothers, mine, his, theirs, all waiting for sons who never fully returned. For the first time since the trial, I whispered his father's name, out loud. The air didn't move. Nothing changed. But I felt something loosen in my chest, like a knot that had stopped believing in itself. That evening, I met Armin again. He asked me to walk with him. We followed the tram line uphill, the city unfolding below us. Mosques, churches, apartment blocks with laundry fluttering like truce flags. He said, "They told me your commander is writing a book." I nodded. "He's good at writing stories. Are you in it?" "I don't know." "Probably not." "You should be." I laughed. "Why? To make sure he gets the lies right?" Armin looked at me then, his eyes bright and raw. "Because you're the only one who still sounds like you remember." That line stuck to me like the smell of cordite. Remembering. That was the real temptation, wasn't it? Not the drink, not the pride, not even survival. It was the temptation to believe that memory could stay folded neatly in the drawer, obedient, harmless, that you could live beside it without it reaching for your throat at night. Weeks passed. I worked, ate, slept, avoided the mirror. But Armin had disturbed something. I began to see ghosts not in the past, but in the present. In every man who refused to look back. In every woman who crossed the street when the word tribunal appeared in the newspaper. Then one day, a journalist came to the depot. A foreign woman, hair tied, press badge heavy with confidence. She said she was doing a follow-up on veterans adjusting to civilian life. I almost laughed. Adjusting is what you do to furniture, not to guilt. She asked if she could record our conversation. I said yes, thinking she'd forget me once she heard my slow, accented English, but she didn't. She leaned in when I spoke about the city, about how the trams ran smoother now, how children no longer ducked at loud noises. She said, "That's beautiful. Beautiful." No one had called anything I said beautiful in 20 years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice the way she said it, soft, admiring, dangerous. It wasn't desire in the usual sense. It was something deeper, darker. The temptation of being understood, of having someone look at the broken mechanism inside you and call it human. I began to see her often. She'd wait near the depot, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with questions disguised as sympathy. Her name was Elise. She spoke about reconciliation, about healing narratives. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe myself through her eyes. One evening she asked me, "Do you ever regret lying?" I froze. The question felt rehearsed, too sharp for casual talk. "I didn't lie," I said. I simplified. She smiled faintly. "That's what everyone says." I looked at her recorder on the table. The red light blinked like a heartbeat. I reached out and turned it off. "Off the record?" she asked. "Yes," I said. And then I told her one small truth. Not the whole story, just enough to taste the danger. I told her about the White House, the enamel pot, the boy hiding behind it. I told her how the commander's voice trembled, not from guilt, but from pride. How the men had laughed, because laughter was cheaper than repentance. She didn't write anything down. She just listened. When I finished, she said, "You could still testify again." I laughed bitterly. "They don't reopen cases for ghosts." "Maybe not," she said, "but ghosts don't forget how to speak." That night, I drank again. This time, it wasn't for forgetting. It was for courage, or maybe cowardice in disguise. The next morning, I found a letter under my door, handwritten, no signature, just one line. "The boy deserves what you owe him." I looked outside. No one. Only fog and pigeons. But something inside me had already begun to unravel. I went to the tribunal again, this time without a summons. I told the clerk I wanted to amend my statement. She looked at me the way doctors look at patients who diagnose themselves. "It's been closed," she said. "Finalized." "History isn't final," I said. She sighed, scribbled a note, said someone might contact me. No one did. Days later, Armin stopped coming. The shop was closed. The street was quiet. I asked around, and someone said he'd gone north to work with the reconstruction crew near the border. I stood there, holding that information like an old medal, something that meant pride to someone else, not to me. That night, I went home, opened the drawer where I kept my medals, my discharge papers, and my tribunal transcript. I read the line that said, "The witness showed consistency and composure." Then I took a pen and added, "He showed both because he was afraid of what would happen if he didn't." The ink bled into the paper like confession trying to escape. The next morning, the depot felt too bright. I told Amir I needed time off. He nodded. "For repairs?" "Yes," I said. "For something that's been broken too long." That night, I packed a small bag. Water, cigarettes, the photograph Armin had given me. I took the tram to the last stop, then walked north, where the reconstruction site was said to be. The temptation had changed shape now. It wasn't about pride or safety or escape. It was about truth, the ugliest temptation of all. Because once you start telling it, you can never go back to silence. I didn't know what I would say to him if I found him. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But for the first time, I wanted to find out whether words could build something instead of bury it. The night was cold, and the road ahead smelled faintly of iron, like the beginning of a wound trying to heal. The road north ran through the hills where the war had once hummed like a bad dream. Every turn smelled of damp earth, pine, and unfinished sentences. I followed the map Armin had left in my mind, the way he talked about the reconstruction site near the old schoolhouse, the one that used to echo with children's songs before the roof caved in. It took 2 days to find him. The workers were clearing debris from what had once been a municipal hall. The walls leaned inward like tired men. When I asked for Armin, a woman pointed toward the courtyard. He was there, hammer in hand, shirt dark with sweat, his face sharper now, more certain. He didn't look surprised to see me. "You came," he said. "I owed you that much." We sat under the half-ruined archway, the sky broken into uneven squares above us. He handed me a canteen. "You said once you told them enough. Maybe you should tell me the rest." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the truth was heavier than the concrete around us. So I began slowly. Not the facts, not yet, but the tone, the smell, the sound of boots over gravel. I told him how orders were given like prayers, how mercy had to be stolen, how men laughed louder than gunfire to drown out what they'd done.
He listened, not as a judge, but as someone collecting fragments of his own father from my words. When I stopped, he said quietly, "If you ever want to say it all, I'll listen." That sentence became my drug. I started visiting the site every weekend. The rhythm of rebuilding was intoxicating. The thud of hammers, the scrape of shovels, the way dust rose like absolution. For a man who'd only ever known destruction, the idea of putting something back together was a kind of narcotic. The others welcomed me easily. They didn't know who I'd been. To them, I was just an older worker, steady hands, quiet eyes. No questions. That anonymity was its own pleasure, a small rebellion against history. At night, we'd sit around a fire, our faces orange and ghost-like. They told stories about wives, about football, about the price of bricks. When it was my turn, I spoke about the depot, about trams that never stopped running even when the city did. I didn't speak of the war, but it lived inside my pauses, waiting for translation. Armin often watched me. Sometimes I caught him studying my hands, as if wondering what they had once held. One night, after the others had gone to sleep, he asked, "Do you ever see him? My father, I mean." I shook my head. "No dreams?" he pressed. "Only noises," I said. "The kind that wake you but don't tell you why." He nodded. "Then maybe he's not angry." That comforted me more than I wanted to admit. By the third week, I was living there part-time. I called my supervisor, said I'd taken on extra repair work for the city. He didn't question it. I think he knew I needed something the depot couldn't give. Rebuilding became ritual. I mixed cement as if baptizing my own hands. Every wall I raised felt like penance measured in centimeters. I told myself this was redemption, sweat instead of prayer, dust instead of confession. But redemption, I was learning, is greedy. It asks for witnesses. Elise called one evening. "Where have you been disappearing to?" she asked. "Working," I said. "Where?" "Up north." "Can I come?" I hesitated. She had the kind of curiosity that sounded like empathy, but smelled like headlines. Still, I said yes. She arrived 2 days later, camera slung around her neck, notebook already half filled. The workers liked her instantly. Foreigners still carried the illusion of fairness. She interviewed them about rebuilding, about forgiveness. Then she turned to me. "Do you think rebuilding can heal a lie?" Her voice carried softly over the hammering. Armin looked up from his work, waiting for my answer. "I don't know," I said. "But maybe a wall can hold both truth and silence if it's strong enough." She smiled faintly, but I saw the disappointment in her eyes. She wanted confession, not architecture. That night, Elise joined our fire.
She spoke about her time covering other conflicts: Rwanda, Chechnya, Iraq. Every place had the same pattern: blood, denial, reconstruction, forgetting. She asked if I thought Bosnia had truly healed. No, I said. We just learned how to limp in rhythm. The men laughed, but Armin didn't. After midnight, Elise found me near the river lighting a cigarette. The night was warm, cicadas buzzing like static. She stepped closer. "You're not just a worker," she said. "No one is," I replied. "You were there, weren't you? The massacre near Dobrinja." My chest froze. I hadn't spoken that name aloud in years. "How do you know that?" "I read your transcript." It was sanitized, but I read between the lines. I took a long drag. "And what did you find?" "A man trying to live with someone else's blood on his conscience." She wasn't wrong. "I could tell your story," she whispered. "Not the tribunal's version, yours. The one that hurts, but heals." I looked at her, really looked. There was no malice, only hunger. But hunger can destroy just as surely as hate. "Not yet," I said. Her hand brushed mine. "When you're ready." She left the next morning. The camera never came out again. After she was gone, something shifted. The air felt thicker. Armin grew quieter, distant. One evening, I found him reading the tribunal archives on his phone, the same pages I had once studied. "Do you think they'll ever tell the full truth?" he asked. "Maybe," I said. "But by then, no one will believe it." He turned the screen toward me. My name, my testimony. "This is you," he said. "Yes. And this part where you said you didn't recall the village. That's my village." The silence between us grew jagged.
"I did what I had to," I whispered.
He stood up, shaking his head. "You had to, or you chose to?" I wanted to tell him that choice is a luxury war doesn't sell, that sometimes morality is just the last bullet you save for yourself. But the words died before they reached air. He walked away. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the half-built wall, staring at the moon caught in a puddle. I thought about confession, not as absolution, but as surrender. The way soldiers used to drop weapons when they realized they were fighting their own shadows. At dawn, I found Armin by the workshed. He didn't turn when I approached. "I was there," I said, "at your father's house." His shoulders stiffened. I lied on the stand. I said we found no civilians. I said we heard no cries. But we did. I did. He faced me, eyes sharp with something that wasn't hatred, it was recognition. The sudden awareness that the ghost you've been chasing has a pulse. "Why now?" he asked. "Because you deserve what I owe you." He took a step closer. "And what do you owe?" "The truth." He looked at me for a long time. Then, softly, "That's not mine alone." He walked away again, slower this time, not out of anger, but exhaustion. I stayed another week, finishing the wall. Each stone felt heavier, more deliberate. When it was done, I pressed my palm against it, rough, cold, stubborn, like me. That night I went to the river again. The bottle was half full. I poured the rest into the water. "For him," I said. The current caught it, turned it silver, and carried it away. But the next morning, Armin was gone. His tools were still there. No one had seen him leave. Rumors spread. Maybe he'd gone to confront one of the officers named in the files. Maybe he'd just walked into the hills to scream. I didn't know which terrified me more. I stayed behind, waiting, rebuilding what little we had left of him. the wall, the silence, the unfinished question between us. Every hammer stroke echoed with one truth I could no longer escape. I had spent years protecting the living from guilt, and now I was killing the dead all over again by refusing to speak. That was the night I made my decision. Not to flee, not to hide, but to return to the place where my lie was born, the tribunal, the city, the emblem that looked down like a blind god. Because sometimes indulgence isn't in pleasure or sin, sometimes it's in silence, and I had indulged in mine for too long. The city looked smaller when I came back, or maybe I had grown too large with shame to fit inside it. Sarajevo has that trick. It folds around you like a coat one day and then shrinks into your throat the next. I went first to the depot. The men greeted me with jokes, pretending not to notice the new weight behind my smile. Emir handed me coffee, black and thick, and said, "You look like you've been working in the sun too long." "I have," I said. It didn't help. He didn't ask what that meant. He just nodded, and that was mercy enough. The radio played old news, politicians shaking hands, peace talks in rooms with perfect lighting. I listened the way you listen to a language you once knew but no longer believe in. Every word sounded borrowed. For days I drifted between work and sleep, waiting for a message that wouldn't come. Armin had vanished completely. I called the reconstruction site. Nothing. The foreman said he'd left without pay. I checked the hospitals, then the police reports, then the morgue. Nothing. I told myself that meant he was alive, but hope is just another word for denial when it starts to taste bitter. The guilt didn't arrive like thunder. It crept, under the skin, behind the eyes, in the half-second before sleep when memory opens its hand to show you what it's been hiding. At night, I heard knocking, always soft, always at the same hour, between 2 and 3, when the city forgets its name. I'd wake, heart pounding, but there was no one at the door. Sometimes I'd think it was the sound of hammering from the reconstruction site, still echoing in my head. Other times, it was laughter, low, familiar, unfinished. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped shaving. I started writing.
It began as notes, small, hesitant lines on scraps of paper, phrases that didn't know whether they were apology or evidence. He begged us to check the barn. The commander said there was no time. The sky smelled of copper that morning. We were all tired enough to believe orders were mercy. Soon the scraps became pages. Pages became nights. I filled entire notebooks without realizing what I was building. Not a confession, not yet, but a map back to the man I had been before silence became survival. Each page felt like reopening an old wound, but I couldn't stop. Guilt, once it finds rhythm, becomes its own kind of addiction. I started bringing the notebooks to work, hiding them inside the tram logs. I wrote while waiting for the engines to warm, while the men smoked outside. I told myself I was writing for Armin, for his father, for whoever might still be listening. But deep down, I knew. I was writing to prove to myself that I still existed. Then, one evening, Elise returned. I saw her waiting by the depot gate, her expression calm but her eyes restless. "You disappeared," she said. "So did everyone else," I replied. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small recorder. "I've been reading the tribunal transcripts again," she said, "and I found something." I tensed. "What?" "A witness mentioned a house, the same house you told me about off record, but the official testimony doesn't match his. There's a hole, a gap, like someone edited time." I stared at her. "You think that someone was me?" "I think that someone was protecting you," she said softly. She paused. "You can fix it. You can give the real story. I can help you publish it, not as scandal, but as truth. People deserve that." "Do they?" I asked.
Or do they just want another war to read about before dinner? She didn't flinch. You owe it to the dead. That sentence, you owe it to the dead, cracked something inside me. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say the dead owe us silence, because silence is the only peace they get. But I couldn't. So I nodded. Give me time. Weeks passed. Elise called, emailed, waited. I wrote, tore pages, rewrote. The notebooks grew heavier, darker. Some nights I thought I could hear the words shifting, whispering, asking why it had taken me so long to let them breathe. Then one morning I woke to find the tram yard empty and the police waiting by the office. "Mr. Cadrick?" one of them asked. Yes. They showed me a folder. Inside, a photograph. Armin, lying by the riverbank near the reconstruction site. The water had carried him miles before surrendering the body. Cause of death? Drowning. No sign of struggle. My knees gave out before I could ask another question. They said there was no note, no witnesses, just mud on his boots and a small piece of paper in his jacket. One of my old tribunal transcripts, folded neatly, underlined in red. The witness stated he could not recall the incident. For days, I wandered the city in silence. The trams hissed inside. The pigeons circled the cathedral tower like they always had. Nothing had changed, but everything had. I went to the river, the same place I had once poured out the bottle. The current whispered against the stones, carrying someone else's silence now. I thought of Armin, standing by that wall we built, how the dust clung to his hair, how he said his father might not be angry anymore. Now, he would never know if I'd meant to tell the truth. The world didn't collapse loudly. It just went quiet, as if someone had turned down the volume on existence. Food lost taste. Air lost color. My hands, once steady, trembled when I tried to lift a wrench. At work, Amir watched me carefully. "You look sick," he said. "I am," I said. "It's not the kind doctors cure." He didn't press further. None of them did. The war had trained us to recognize the invisible wounds and walk around them like unexploded shells. I stopped going to the depot. I stayed home with the notebooks. I read them out loud until my voice cracked. Every word was a brick in a wall I could no longer finish. Sometimes I imagined Armin standing by the door, listening. Sometimes I imagined his father beside him. Sometimes I imagined the judge, the commander, the interpreter, all of them waiting for me to say something worth their time. But words, once broken, lose their direction. I tried to burn the notebooks one night. The flame caught, but the paper wouldn't go quietly. It twisted, blackened, screamed in its own language. The smoke filled the room with the smell of ink and regret. When it cleared, a few pages remained half-burned, sentences cut off mid-breath. He begged us to check the barn. The commander said there was no time. The boy watched from behind the pot. I gathered the ashes in a small tin and placed them on the table. My new shrine, my new truth. Elise came back once more. She knocked for a long time before I opened the door. "I heard about Armin," she said. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "You were the last person who spoke to him, weren't you?" "I think so." "Then you have to speak for him now." "I already did," I said, "and it killed him." Her eyes filled with something I didn't recognize. Not pity, not anger, just fatigue. "You can't carry it alone." "Yes, I can," I said. "I built my silence to last." She sighed, then left. That night, I walked to the tribunal building. It was late. The halls were empty. I slipped through the security gate like a ghost. On the wall outside the courtroom hung photographs of past sessions. Judges, witnesses, survivors. I found mine among them. The caption read, "Reliable testimony from local veteran, 2003. I stared at my younger face. Neat hair, clean suit, the calm of a man who believed lies could hold a roof over the past. I took a pen from my pocket and wrote beneath the caption, "Reliably afraid." Then I walked into the courtroom itself. The air was cold, untouched. The microphones waited like sleeping animals. I sat at the same table as before. For a moment, I could hear the echo of my old voice, crisp, precise, sanitized. Then I pressed the button and spoke again, this time into the dark. "My name is Amir Kadrick." I lied. The sound bounced off the walls, small, fragile, but real. I said it again, louder. I lied. The silence afterward felt alive. When I left the building, dawn had begun to bleed over the rooftops. I walked to the river, the same river that had taken Armin. I placed the tin of ashes on the water and watched it float, turning slowly in the current. Somewhere behind me, the first tram of the morning screamed on its rails, a sound like memory returning from the dead. I didn't look back. That was the collapse. Not the shouting, not the violence, but the quiet afterward, when every breath becomes a verdict you can't appeal. Because sometimes the real punishment for lying isn't being caught. It's surviving long enough to hear the truth whisper your name. The tribunal never summoned me again. They didn't have to. The truth had already taken over the only court that mattered, the one inside my head, where every silence was evidence and every heartbeat a witness. I stopped wearing my watch. Time no longer worked the way it used to. It came in flashes, fragments of sunlight, the squeal of tram wheels, the hiss of rain on steel roofs. The city moved on. People rebuilt, rebranded, remarried. I was still sitting in that chair, talking to ghosts. For weeks, I lived between waking and memory. When I did sleep, I dreamed of walls, endless, pale, wet with rain, and of a boy walking beside them, his face half-shadowed. Sometimes he turned to me, sometimes he didn't, but always he was silent. The depot sent Amir to check on me. He brought bread, cigarettes, and a bottle of rakia. When I opened the door, he didn't speak at first. He just looked around the room, the notebooks, the ashes, the half-burned pages spread across the table. "Writing a book?" he asked gently. "Not one anyone would publish." He smiled faintly. "You could still fix things. Tell it the right way." "The right way doesn't exist," I said. "Only the honest one. And it hurts more." He nodded. "Maybe that's why it matters." We drank quietly. He told me about his twins, how they'd started asking about the war at school. "I don't know what to tell them," he said. "That we were heroes? Monsters? Survivors? Tell them we were scared," I said. "That's all any of us were." When he left, I felt lighter and heavier at once, like confession had begun in whispers, uninvited, yet unstoppable. Days turned into weeks. I found myself walking the city again, slower now, as if retracing steps I'd once hurried past. Every street had a memory hidden in its corners, a bullet scar under new paint, a bakery rebuilt where a checkpoint used to stand, a child playing soccer where men once carried rifles. I began to see the city differently, not as a wound, but as a patient who'd learned to live with scars. I wondered if I could do the same. One evening, I stopped by the bridge, the one with the pigeons. the one that had watched everything and testified to nothing. I stood there until the light faded, and for the first time I spoke to Armin, not as the boy who accused me, but as the man who made me remember. "I don't know what you wanted from me," I said softly. "Forgiveness? Proof? Maybe both. But I see you now, not as your father's ghost, but as my own conscience wearing his face." The water below shimmered faintly, catching the streetlights like tiny confessions drifting downstream. It was Elise who forced the next step. She found me again one morning, sitting at the depot's edge, watching the trams glide like quiet prayers. "You disappeared again," she said, "so I came to find you." "I'm good at disappearing," I replied. She sat beside me, uninvited but welcome. "You don't have to publish anything," she said, "but you could still record it. Leave something behind, something that isn't a lie." I looked at her. Her recorder was in her hand again, small, silver, blinking. I hesitated, then nodded. "No editing," I said. "None," she promised. We began the sessions that afternoon, in her rented apartment near the river. She dimmed the lights. I sat across from her, hands trembling slightly. The recorder's red eye blinked again, the same color as guilt. "Start wherever you want," she said. So I did. I spoke about the mountain, the orders, the laughter that sounded too loud. I described the enamel pot, the child behind it, the commander's look when I hesitated. I said the man's name, his son's, my own. Every word felt like dragging a rusted nail through flesh, painful but freeing in its rawness. Elise didn't interrupt. Sometimes tears ran down her face. Sometimes she just stared, like she was seeing a wound she couldn't bandage. When I faltered, she said softly, "Keep going." I told her everything I remembered, and everything I had spent years pretending not to. When I finished, there was silence, heavy, complete. Then she said, "Thank you." For what? For being human. That broke me. I cried for the first time in 20 years. Not the controlled tears of guilt, but the kind that burn, that empty you until breathing feels new again. In the days that followed, Elise transcribed the recordings. She showed me the pages. My voice turned into ink, stripped of defense. She wanted to publish them anonymously, but I refused. "If it doesn't carry my name, it's just another version of the lie." She nodded. "Then it will carry your name." I didn't sign anything that day, but I knew I would. Then something unexpected happened. Letters started arriving, from other veterans, from widows, from children. Some angry, some grateful. One read, "You said what we were too afraid to." Another, "Your truth cost us peace, but maybe that's the only way peace begins." It wasn't redemption. Redemption would have been too clean, too cinematic. This was messier, a mixture of gratitude and hatred that felt more like justice. The tribunal called again, weeks later, not to prosecute, but to request a supplemental statement, a formal amendment to my testimony. When I stepped into that room again, the same emblem watched from above. The same interpreter sat at her desk, but everything was different. I told them the truth, all of it, without the sanitizing verbs, without the neat commas. When I finished, the judge didn't speak for a long time. Then he said quietly, "History thanks you." I almost laughed. History shouldn't thank anyone. It should just remember. That night, I walked back through the empty streets, the sound of my boots echoing like metronomes of regret. Sarajevo smelled of rain again, metallic, forgiving. I stopped by the river once more. I whispered to the water, "He knows now. Both of you do." A breeze lifted, cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet stone and something faintly sweet, like the smoke from Armin's campfire that first night we met. For a moment, I thought I heard his voice, low and steady. "It's enough." The next morning I went back to work. Emir looked up from the tram pit, surprised. "Back to fixing wheels?" he asked. "No," I said, "just keeping them straight." He laughed, but his eyes softened. "Good to have you back, Capo." I smiled, small but real. Not Capo anymore, just Amir. That evening, when the last tram left the depot, I stood by the door, watching its lights disappear into the curve of the street. The air trembled with echoes, of engines, of voices, of memory. For the first time, I didn't turn away. The city wasn't innocent, neither was I. But maybe innocence was never the point. Maybe endurance was. The quiet, stubborn act of living truthfully after lying to survive. I walked home slowly. The streets were wet, the lights reflected in puddles like tiny mirrors. Each one held a fragment of my face, different but whole. And in the silence between footsteps, I realized something simple. Not beautiful, not poetic, just true. Forgiveness doesn't arrive. It grows, stubborn as weeds, quiet as dust, patient as rain. That night, I slept without hearing the knocking. No ghosts, just the faint hum of the tram line running past my window. A sound like history still in motion. I never expected peace to sound like this. The low hum of morning trams, the hiss of steam from a kettle, the faint laughter of a city that had finally learned how to forget without lying to itself. I live simply now. My apartment smells of oil, dust, and coffee. Every morning, I open the window to watch the workers sweep the tram lines clean. Their brooms move like metronomes, brushing away yesterday's noise. Sometimes a child waves as the first tram passes. I wave back. That small exchange, so innocent, so unguarded, feels like a kind of absolution. Not divine, not formal, just human. Elise's article came out a month later. She titled it, "The Man Who Fixed His Silence." The piece wasn't sensational. It was quiet, deliberate, the way truth should sound when it's finally tired of screaming. The world reacted like it always does, half in anger, half in awe. Some called me a hero. Others called me a traitor. Both were wrong, but both were right in ways I no longer argued with. I received letters again, from families, soldiers, students. One from a woman who wrote, "My husband never spoke. You did. That's enough for both of you." I keep that one folded in my wallet, next to an old photo of the tram depot. When I return to the river, I still bring flowers. Not for Armin, not for his father, not even for myself. For the space between us, that thin, trembling distance where truth and silence once met and decided to trade places. The water moves slower these days, or maybe my eyes do. I watch reflections drift by, clouds, bridges, the occasional leaf, and I imagine each one is a version of me that could have been. The soldier, the liar, the witness, all of them dissolving into the same current. Sometimes, when the light hits right, I swear I see two shadows walking beside mine, one taller, one smaller. They never speak. They don't have to. The depot still calls me Capo, but it's affectionate now, not reverent. I help the new boys learn how to read the sound of a machine before it breaks, how to hear the tremor, the slight stutter before collapse. They laugh when I tell them that's all life really is, listening carefully before something gives way. At lunch, Amir teases me about the book deal Elise offered. I tell him I turned it down. Some stories are meant to be lived once, not sold twice. He shrugs. Then you already wrote the only part that matters. He's right. Once a year, I visit the old reconstruction site. The wall Armin and I built still stands. It's not perfect, a few cracks, some erosion, but it endures. Children play soccer near it. Their laughter bounces off the bricks like sunlight off metal. Someone painted a single word across it in red. Enough. I run my hand along the rough surface and feel the warmth beneath the stone. Not forgiveness, not redemption, just persistence. I leave a cigarette at its base, unlit. Old soldiers still have their rituals. At night, I often replay that first day in the tribunal. The emblem above, the microphones, the boy in the back of the room. I used to hate that memory. Now I understand it. It wasn't judgment that terrified me. It was recognition. That moment when someone else's eyes see your truth before you've learned to say it. We all want to believe our lies have borders, but they leak through walls, through words, through silence, until one day you find yourself standing in the flood and realizing you're still alive. That's when life begins again. Not clean, not proud, but honest. I keep one of the tribunal headphones on my desk, a souvenir, or maybe a warning. When the city outside grows too loud, I put them on, not to listen, but to remember the pause between translation and truth, that small delay where choice still exists. Sometimes I whisper into the silence. My name is Amir Kadrik. I lied, and I lived, and I told it. It's not a prayer, it's not an apology. It's a way of keeping the river inside me moving. The world no longer calls me soldier or witness or liar, just man. And that, finally, feels like enough. The trams start again at dawn. I hear their first rumble before the city wakes. Steady, familiar, forgiving. The sound rolls across the streets, over the bridge, through the hills that once echoed with gunfire. Now it's just rhythm, continuity, a pulse that says, we're still here. I take a sip of coffee. I watch the sun crawl through the mist, and I breathe, not to forget, not to atone, just to remember that the silence, at last, is mine. A man who lied for honor learns that truth, though late, still speaks in the language of endurance.